Hey, World Changers, I hope you're all well. So it is Susie B here, and we have got a very different format for you today. You'll be wondering why I'm here. Well, basically, I've been pushed out of my comfort zone because, as you know, it's Transformation Month, and I wanted to I've been trying to get Rabbi Steve Leader onto the coaching program for several months now. And because of his very busy life, he's been unable to do it until now. But one of the things he did say was to challenge me and say, no, I don't want to come on and do a coaching session. I want to come on, you interview me, you ask me some questions, and I'll just answer it. So here I am. And the reason why I wanted Steve to come on is because Steve is the author of this book, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us. And as I said, he's also a rabbi. You are the rabbi of, let me just get this right, senior rabbi of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, a prestigious synagogue in Los Angeles with 2 campuses and 2,400 families that you're supporting. So pretty impressive.
Yes.
But me and you, Steve, we first met, well, it must be 7 years ago now, when your book first came out and I interviewed you briefly.
No, actually, it only feels like that long ago. The book came out about 2.5 years ago. So it was probably about 2 years ago that we first met.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I've been left the BBC for 3 years now.
You were with the BBC when we did it. BBC Scotland.
Yeah, definitely. That's right. Yeah. Well, what I do remember is that
I think this quarantine has caused you to lose sense of time, as it has for all of us.
It's quite possible.
That's okay.
It's quite possible. Every day is just like another.
Every day is like every day. Yeah.
So the reason why I wanted to get you on, because this book, particularly for me, was instrumental in my journey of overcoming pain and suffering and my transformation. It's one of those signature books or signature moments where you read something or something just sticks and just helps you along the journey. And I have wanted to get you in to speak to our World Changers, our members, to tell your story and also help. As I've said, the topic is Transformation Month, so we're exploring the subject of transformation, and I want to look at the subject of pain and how we can use that to come out, as your book suggests, more beautiful than before. So I'm going to hand over to you. I want this to be about you. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. You're coming to us from Los Angeles today, but just tell us what life is like there for you right now, because there's a lot of pain going on in the world.
Yeah. In a way, my job hasn't changed very much at all. The only difference is that I'm not spending any time in the car in Los Angeles trying to get from point A to point B. I was just telling my wife earlier today, when I have an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting now, I, at about 2 minutes to 8, walk into my study where I am now and start the meeting. But before this pandemic, I would have left the house at 7:15 for a 45-minute car ride through unpleasant traffic to get to a meeting to sit with a bunch of people that I could just as easily have done this with. So in some ways, it's my job hasn't changed. It's in a way gotten a little more manageable. I can get more done in a day because driving in Los Angeles is the closest thing there is to hell on earth. So my days consist of what they've always consisted of, a mixture of counseling people, working with our very large staff to help them do their jobs, raising money, which is an important part of any senior pastor, minister, rabbi's job to keep the entire operation afloat, especially now. And I'm spending 2 days a week writing, working on the second draft of my next book, which will be out in February of 2021.
Okay,
so my days are very full. We have a lot of people struggling emotionally through this. We also run a school, we run schools. We have 1,400 children in our schools. And so there's also a lot of content that's required to move a school from classroom to online learning. And, I spend a lot of time every day talking people off the ledge, essentially. that's the job.
Yeah.
And frankly, being this busy helps manage my own anxiety. I've always dealt with my own anxiety by being a workaholic, and this is no different.
Oh, we sound familiar territory on that, because I've definitely been a workaholic myself. And what lockdown has taught me is all about slowing down. And, I'm learning to adjust from not filling my life up with stuff. And it's just actually focusing on one thing, which has been nice. But it was definitely an adjustment period there.
Yeah, I can't say my life has slowed down. I'm working really hard, but I will say that I'm working in ways that I think will make my life better when this is all over.
Yeah.
And that's the good news. It dragged me into 21st century technology, which I'd been resisting.
Yes.
For me, because my job involves a tremendous amount of socializing with people, breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Exhausting.
It's none of that. I feel none of that social pressure now. And that's been the greatest relief, is, to not be running around having meals, 3 times a day, when I'm in conversation with people and I have an agenda, they have an agenda. It's that part has been a real relief. And I hope not to go back to quite the demanding social schedule I had before. But, we'll see. There's Heinrich Heine had this old joke about the Jews. He said, the Jews are like everyone else, just more so. I know, it's a great line. And in many ways, this pandemic, I think, is making all of us, as much as we'd like to think it's creating these sweeping changes, which it is externally, but internally, I think it's making all of us just more so, just more of who we were before this all began.
Yes.
If you were a creative, adaptive person before, you're creating and adapting even more so now. If you were paralyzed by anxiety before, you're even more paralyzed now. I think it's just intensified who we already were. And by the way, I think that's important to remember if you have any illusions about changing anyone during this period, or changing the people you're living with in such confined circumstances now. It's
not the time.
It's not going to happen. And so the better path, I think, is to be more sensitive toward who people really are, and grant greater latitude for them to be who they really are, rather than trying to change them. It's just another example of going with the current instead of against it, which is, I think, a very important lesson to learn in life.
Well, let's talk about your role, because you have, for the last 27, 28, 20, 30 years, you have been supporting people in your career and your vocation, and you have seen a lot of pain and suffering. I mean, did you, without being cocky or complacent, did you think that you kind of had pain sussed and it was nailed, and you're like, yeah, I know all there is to know about pain?
It's very interesting that you asked that question, because I'm working right now on the introduction to my next book. The next book is called The Beauty of What Remains. And it's about what death teaches us about the value and beauty and power of life. And in the forward, which I'm working on now, I'm talking about how when I was a young rabbi, I thought I knew so much and had learned so much over the years about death and loss and grief. And then a year and a half ago, my father died.
I'm so sorry.
And I realized, thank you, I realized after his death and the grieving that I went through for this past year and a half, and I'm still going through, despite what I thought I knew almost nothing.
Yeah.
So I would say, to answer your question, or to respond to your statement, like, oh my goodness, did you ever think you knew everything about pain and suffering? Of course I did. I thought, well, I've seen in my life as a rabbi, I've seen people through divorce, I've seen people through death, I've seen people through cancer, I've seen people through business failure, I've seen people through public shame and the loss of a reputation. Like, I've seen it all. I have the right answers, etc. And then, much like my father's death teaching me I didn't know very much about death, I had my own very painful experience, both physically and spiritually and emotionally painful experience, which we can get into in a minute. And it really taught me that I didn't know very much about pain and adversity before, and that what I had been saying I don't think was useless to people, but I don't think it was nearly as close to the deepest truth that I'm capable of getting to today as a result of my own suffering. So the book that you held up, More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us, yes, that book, was really written as a kind of apology. It was written as an apology to everyone about everything I had ever said about pain before I went through my own experience. And it was my attempt to set the record straight. The book is maybe 5% about me, but that 5% was a very instructive, 100% of my life through the journey. So yes, I thought I knew more than I did, and life taught me a whole new set of lessons that frankly can only be learned by pain. Pain is the only real teacher. Success doesn't teach us very much except to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Really, pain is the only disruptive force with enough power to really change people's lives. Look, for example, at the power of this virus, of the death, of the power of the fear of death, essentially.
Yeah.
What else could you possibly imagine would have the power to shut down the earth, to shut down the globe, to cause us all to pause and think, and to reconsider our lives and our relationships with each other and the interconnected nature of the global community? Nothing but fear of death and pain could have forced us all collectively into the position we're in, which is going to have some very beautiful and important benefits when it's over. None of them worth the pain, but they're not worthless. They're not worth the price we're paying, but neither are they worthless, these lessons that we're learning. So let's make the most of this. Now, we can get into when that first happened for me and for you, but we're now seeing it played out on a global, epic scale.
Yeah. Now, we are going to talk about the purpose of pain tomorrow, so I will go back over these questions tomorrow and to look at being worthless and the power of pain. But I want to know about your story. So what was it that changed your whole perspective on what you thought you knew and what you realized you didn't know?
Yeah. So what happened was about 5 years ago, I was with my son. We went out to dinner. We were driving home from dinner, and we were in a very, very frightening car accident. Someone ran a red light and T-boned our car. I was actually facing them head on, and I was able to turn the car enough that we didn't take the hit head on. And it was a hit and run. It was a big SUV. They stopped for a moment, and then I think when they realized the severity of the damage and what they had done, they panicked and took off. And so we never actually caught or found.
To this day, we find out.
To this day.
Oh, wow.
To this
There's
day.
a painful sort of a teacher there, because you want
it does
justice.
It does force one to let go and to move forward. When there really is nothing that can be done, you have two choices. You remain paralyzed or you move forward.
That's what we actually talked about last month, is letting go. So
you have, I guess you have a choice, but to me it didn't seem like I had no difficulty making that choice and just saying there is nothing we can do about that part of this equation. So what happened was we were in this terrible car accident, and I suffered a spinal injury as a result. And to make a somewhat long and painful story shorter, after a few months, it was so bad that I couldn't walk any longer. And when I would stand, the pain was excruciating. It was nerve pain and from my damaged spine. And I don't know if you've ever experienced nerve pain, but it's just torture. There's no other word for it. It's constant torture. And it's not like a broken bone or something where if you just readjust your position or move a different way or you don't use that arm, it doesn't hurt. It hurts, and it hurts all the time.
It's just chronic.
So I was really in a lot of pain. And I have really good doctors. One of the things about being a rabbi in Los Angeles is doctors take pretty good care of you.
Yeah.
Because most of the members of my congregation. So I had doctors prescribing opioids, and frankly, there was nothing else that helped. And the opioids didn't help much, but they helped a little. So fast forward, 6 or 8 weeks, and I'm a zombie on the couch in my house, taking too many opioids and steroids. And I became clinically depressed, and the pain wasn't much better. Then I had surgery. They finally determined that there was really nothing that could be done short of surgery. So I had spinal surgery, more pain, more opioids, more steroids. And it was a dark downward spiral for 6, 7, 8 months. And I finally was able to wean myself off of the opioids. I went into physical therapy, and I started working with a psychiatrist. And I started reaching out to friends and family for help. And these things in combination, along with a lot of time and a lot of thinking about my life, have resulted ultimately in my life being so much better and sane than it was before the car accident, which is why I called the book More Beautiful Than Before, How Suffering Transforms Us. So it was only that disruptive, literally paralyzing pain that caused me to re-examine my life and make some important changes. And to to take my mental health more seriously. I still see my psychiatrist every week. I mean, now we're doing it by phone, but I've stayed on this path, and it has deeply enriched. My life's better. My marriage is better. I'm a better dad. I'm a better rabbi. I know things about pain when I'm counseling others that I could never have learned any other way. Would I give it all back for the accident not to have happened? I don't think so.
No. That's what I'm intrigued to know. I mean, you obviously went through an enormous amount of physical pain that was chronic and just, bringing your mental health down. But if you could sum up which was worse, the mental suffering or the physical suffering, is there, which then obviously affects your spiritual and emotional suffering?
I'll tell you, Susie, one of the things I learned in researching this book on pain is that physical pain and emotional pain affect the identical place in the brain.
Okay.
The brain sees them as the same.
Right.
Experiences them as the same. The only difference is that you cannot re-feel physical pain once it's gone. And of course, any of us who have had a terrible breakup or had someone we love die, we know that we can re-experience emotional pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
you can recreate that physical pain as well. You can feel it in your heart, if you think
in your heart, but you can't literally feel it the same way. But other than that difference, I don't distinguish between physical and emotional pain, because pain is pain and it needs to be addressed. And the ways in which we address it are almost identical.
It's funny you say that, because, well, it's not funny, it's tragic, because we do treat pain very differently. If somebody's got a broken leg or a broken arm, they'll get a get well card sent from work, what have you, friends will come around, do the shopping. But when somebody has got mental pain, they're spiraling downwards and suffering with a breakdown or burnout, people shy away from it. We don't know how to handle it, and it is treated differently. But are you saying the same approach is required? It's like being for somebody doing
many. Obviously, you don't go to see an orthopedist for clinical depression. So there are some important differences, but the similarities are more important than even those important differences. And we're going to get into this in our time together over the next several sessions is, how do we address pain? And how do we address pain that we're experiencing? And I think as importantly, how do we address pain that we've caused for others? There's not much out there about that part of this conversation. What does one do when one is the driver, not the victim, right?
Yeah.
For example, in a car accident.
Guaranteed that driver that hit you, he will be suffering from that. He will have guilt around it, I'm sure.
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what kind of a person drives away from an accident like that.
I know.
So, I see the best in most people, but that's a pretty cowardly thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm long past it. But you're right. There is a stigma attached to mental illness that is not attached to physical illness. Although I will tell you, even people with certain physical illnesses tell me that others run from them. They stay away from them. Listen, I'm old enough and have been a rabbi long enough to remember very well the AIDS crisis.
Yes, of course.
Many of the first funerals I did as a young rabbi in my late 20s were victims of AIDS. And people did stay away. You're getting just a taste of it here during this pandemic. But imagine that feeling of other people having masks and gloves and hazmat suits and staying away from you in isolation because of a disease that is not communicable. And I will say, Mike, I think now in a roundabout way, we've hit on one of the important, most painful common denominators of all pain is the feeling of isolation. The feeling of being in it alone is the worst kind of pain.
Yes.
And so I want us to talk about that later too. But to get back to my story, the surviving, and the book is divided into 3 sections: surviving, healing, and growing. So that was my trajectory. I survived the accident. I survived the opioids and the surgery. I healed, and then I grew. And those are the stages that I hope we can all go through when we experience a painful, traumatic event.
So what do you think it was about your experience? Because with pain, you can go either way. You can start spiraling even further down, you become entrenched, become bitter, or you can grow from the experience. What was it in your personal experience that allowed you to grow from it?
Well, I think we all have a kind of a default setting, really from birth. And my default setting was always one of optimism, energy, ambition, enthusiasm, a real love for people and life, a real desire to run toward trouble, not away from it, to help. I was a born helper. It's in my DNA. So I think the real Steve was always there. And what the pain enabled me to do was to come out of that experience a better version of who I really was all the time. A more empathetic person, a more helpful person. By the way, a kinder person. I remember I was at a think tank when I was working on the book. So this would have been about, 3.5 years ago. And I was at a think tank and I was sitting at a table for lunch with, all these sort of eggheady, wonky people. And we were all talking about our project. So I said, well, I'm working on a book right now about pain and its transformational potential. And one of them said to me, he was actually the president of a college, I can't remember which college, and he said to me, well, how are you different as a result of the pain you endured? And without hesitation, Susie, like that, I said, well, I'm much nicer. Now, I don't think I was an an ogre before. I don't think I was an unpleasant person before. I think I was a nice guy before it all happened. But it definitely made me a kinder person.
Yeah.
And I think that I was, in other words, it made me a better version of who I was before.
Mm-hmm.
Not a different version, which I don't think ever really happens, but a better version.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is a very beautiful and powerful result. You know, Dostoevsky said his greatest fear was that his life would not be worthy of his suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very important and beautiful insight into what ought to be the end result of pain, is that you go forward living a life that's worthy of what you've endured,
Yeah.
worthy of your suffering. And that's certainly been the case for me. I have made helping people in pain my mission now, my life's work, because of what I endured. And I'm trying every day to be worthy of the lessons revealed to me through that painful experience. That's the most we can hope for.
Yeah. I mean, this has obviously developed your empathy muscle tenfold, you know, but what else has it done? Are you more patient? You've said you were kinder, you're a better person. I mean, you said you were a better husband, a better father, a better leader.
Yeah, I'm a better listener,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. I'm not so quick to solve problems as much as to identify with them now. I'm much more patient sitting with the pain with people instead of immediately trying to triage and treat it. So I'm a little more, I'm a little more, I don't want to be, I don't want to gender stereotype, but I would say that men in general rush to solve a problem and women just kind of want to be heard.
Mm.
I'm getting better at sitting and enabling being heard before rushing to solve.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a type of patience that I did not evidence before. I think also I am a more emotionally honest and open person than I was before. I always thought that the rabbi had to present a certain outward image.
Okay.
And I'm kind of done with that, you know. I'm done with that. When I'm sad, people know it. When I'm anxious, people know. I've written very openly now. I've written a number of articles, obviously, about pain, and I've written a lot for Time. Time puts out these special editions. They did one on, I wrote for one on Alzheimer's, one on anxiety, one on stress, one on mindfulness. So I've written a lot of essays for Time, and I've been very open about my own struggle with my father's Alzheimer's, my own struggle with anxiety. I'm a much more open person, and I'm trying much more honestly to lead by example and to allow people into my inner life a little bit more. Look, I still have a sense of propriety and privacy, but I am much more open about my own emotional pain in a way that I have found invites other people to be more open about their own. So I'm really trying to lead by example in that way.
So are you more vulnerable, would you say?
Yes, I'm much more vulnerable, but hopefully not dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a particularly dramatic person, and I don't want this conversation. I'm fine with it being about me, but in a relationship where I'm trying to help someone through pain, I try not to make it about me, but I'm always filtering it through my past experience, and it's made me a better, more mature helper, you know, for others. I will also say, obviously, I became a rabbi because I fell in love with Jews and Judaism at some point in my life, and going through this painful experience personally, right up until today, going through this pandemic with the rest of the world, I am falling in love again and again and again with the wisdom of the sages of my tradition, who for thousands, literally 3,000 years, have thought through what it means to be a humane human being, how to live under adverse circumstances as part of a small community, which is part of a larger global community, which is part of a larger historical community. So the ancient rabbis thought it through. There's not a single aspect of the human condition that they did not deeply and powerfully consider. And here I am, after all these years, 34 years now of being a rabbi, here I am yet again falling in love with the wisdom of my tradition and its universal messages. So that for me has been another beautiful experience. It's kind of like, I have these moments. So just to tell you a little bit more about me than you asked, my wife Betsy and I, we got engaged on our second date.
I read that in the book.
Yeah, I fell in love with her the moment she walked in the room. The moment she walked in the room. And I still feel that way when she walks in the room. I really do. And so I fall in love with her again and again and again. You know, just seeing her making a cup of tea in her flannel pajamas in the morning, and I just look at her and think, I'm the most fortunate person in the world. Look, I have this real love. Mm-hmm. I have that experience with the teachings of the rabbis too, that I just keep falling in love with it all over and over and over again. And it's an endless source of love for me. Yeah. So that's been a very positive result of my own journey.
Oh, you can't get a better result than that, than falling in love with your wife, your work, your vocation, like everything that you live for. I mean, one of the things I wanted to touch on, and you know, we will need to wrap up, but it's about role models. You said that, you know, I mean, one of the things I set up Change Your World because I knew when I was going through my pain, I had a lot of people that came into my life and helped me through that pain, and they became role models for me. Now that might have been, you know, reading something in a book, that was a life coach, Alistair, that was helping me, that was a friend that got me into running, that helped me deal with the mental stress I was going through, and it was all these different combinations. And whilst I do have a very positive outlook on life, I do feel it was because of these role models that I was able to grow from the experience. And it sounds like you had that same thing. You had your faith, you had a supportive family round about you, you know, and then, I mean, you had the sunny disposition already, but was that because of the role models you had in early life as well? Or was it the adversity that you experienced?
Well, you've read the book, so you know my childhood was not an entirely happy one. I was forced to grow up at a pretty young age, and I had a pretty harsh father and a pretty joyless childhood. I don't know whether we're talking nature versus nurture here. I don't really have a good answer for you. I do know that my childhood made me an extremely ambitious person. And I knew, going through the painful experience I endured, that I had to find a way out. And I used my ambition, in a sense, to force me to work hard at getting better. And that paradoxically meant reaching out for help. I always was a very self-sufficient person, and viewed looking for help from others as a sign of great weakness. That's the way I was raised. And back to the idea that pain breaks us open, only pain breaks us open and teaches us that we have to make a change. One of the great lessons I learned was that I couldn't do it alone. I needed help to get off of that couch, to get off of those opioids, to heal physically. You know, I had two great physical therapists who really were therapists in the deepest sense of the word. So, you know, there's this saying in the Talmud, the prisoner cannot free himself. And we're going to talk about that in another session, but think about those words for a moment. The prisoner cannot free himself. It's so true. If we're imprisoned in any way, if we're unwilling to reach out, we're going to remain imprisoned. And so, like you, reaching out is the only thing that saved me. It lifted me from my suffering. And again, it's partly because the most painful part of pain is the feeling of isolation, that you're in it alone.
Yeah.
And that can only be remedied if you're willing, to reach your hand through those bars of that cell in which you find yourself and seek someone to raise you from your suffering. And beautifully, heartwarmingly, most people reach back and they help.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I think that is a lovely place to end it for today.
Yeah.
But thank you, Steve. We will be back tomorrow, and say goodbye to the world changers.
Bye, everyone. Bye, world changers. See you tomorrow. Honor to be with you today.